So just a little note on how this is going to go. We want this to be more of a conversation. So we are going to have a couple of moderated questions. Oh, sorry. We're going to have a couple of moderated questions and then open it up to you as our honored attendees and guests here to ask your questions and get to know our panelists a little bit more and tap into their expertise.
This one over just because this one's live.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Great. So this will be, of course I shouldn't have brought my phone, but I just needed it for timing purposes and it's just getting in the way, so great. So just to keep this more conversational, we probably won't go down the line with panelists. So if there is a statement that you feel more compelled to address or not address, feel free to chime in or not as you feel so moved. So Yuko, I appreciated you walking us through the impacts of unstructured play and what that really means for a child's brain development. But we want to back up now and think about what are some of the structural and systemic factors that influence a child's ability to play or not be able to play. So by structural and systemic factors, I mean things like city and urban planning and design, landscapes, neighborhoods in which they live, transportation issues, or it can be as simple as routines and structures during a day. So could you all speak to some of the things that enable or limit a child's ability to play?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to this event. Again, my name is Justin. I first want to thank the good doctor because one of my favorite things to do is to sit in my hammock at my house and let my kids just run around. And now I understand I'm a very good parent, apparently. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you for that. I will share that with my wife when I get home. So my background is in urban and regional planning. So we think a lot about how we design our communities and what kind of impacts that has. From my perspective, is on health. And when we look at it from access to nature, that can be the way that we design our transportation systems, the way that we facilitate different modes of transportation, how sustainable are those transportation methods. So both in preserving our natural environments, but also how can we use design to bring nature within our urban environments. We know that there are significant challenges for some segments of the population to have this kind of nature immersion type of experience that is very profound, but it's not always available for everybody. So what we try to do is really start where people are at, and that is where we begin kind of enhancing their ability to connect to nature. So a couple stories from our experience of being part of the Children in Nature Network and the National League of Cities pilot plan is during our planning process, we engaged with young folks. I think somebody mentioned earlier that why not give the kids a leadership role? These are the folks that we're planning for anyways. So we had 6 high school interns. They were all kids of color, and they were charged with doing a lot of the engagement with their family, with their peers, and going out and talking with neighborhood kids about what is preventing them, in this case, from just getting outside of the house. And it was very profound what they were saying. It was things of neighborhood safety, it was fear of violence, it was things that they just don't feel welcome when they walk out their door. One particular quote was that my neighborhood is a bunch of angry white people, and whenever I go outside, I get yelled at, so I don't go outside anymore. Or another individual was saying that my community is 20 miles away, so I don't feel comfortable anywhere else unless I'm within my community. So how that relates to kind of systemic things is none of this was designed by accident. This is all kind of historic, oftentimes overtly racist policy that was put into place 100 years ago that continue to perpetuate today. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, like Madison does not have a lack of natural space. So the barrier wasn't where's the nature, the barrier was that there is a systemic issues that are facing in Madison that are preventing people from even going out their front door.
Any other thoughts on structural factors that limit a child's ability to play?
I can just speak briefly. So thank you again, just to reiterate the welcoming sense of this room and to see some familiar faces here that are all working on wonderful initiatives to connect kids to nature in multiple ways. I would just speak from our perspective with the ECHO initiative and really thinking about, again, where kids are, where they're coming from, and even like I would sort of say like micro distilling that down to where is that common thread of place that so many children, particularly those from low-income families, are at. And so the way that we look at, again, sort of the systems that children are in, where we can have the most impact, to us, that is within the licensed childcare system. And so what we see there, of course, is limitations, and there may be some in the room here from licensing and from regulatory bodies, so this is not to say we don't need rules around that, but the limitations there, of course, are to promote safety in the name of quality, and thus limit the free play that we learned the value of so much in that first presentation. So I would say, as far as the systemic factors there, it's really just that controlled environment that doesn't have the ability to really adapt and be flexible in terms of what's in that environment that helps really promote healthy child development as far as that free play. And I see some nods here, so thank you.
So you bring up an important part about childcare, and as childcare is licensed or family childcare homes, a lot of our children are in childcare. Sarah, you work with a number of childcare centers across the state, and when we think about equity, geographic equity is also a component of this. And in Colorado, we are all about promoting access to the outdoors, from the backyard to the backcountry, and it makes me curious about the differences that providers experience in urban areas to suburban areas and rural areas. Sarah and Mary, since you work really directly with childcare centers, how can caregivers and parents think about infusing the natural world into their learning spaces, regardless of their urbanicity?
Hi, I'm Mary. I think what is really important is, and forgive me, I actually carried out a presentation last night on the importance of outdoor learning, and I'm so excited to see there's a whole posse of people present. So if I repeat myself, I always say if something's important, it's good to say it twice. So, and I always forget things. But just getting back to, I think it's really important for people to understand child development, and through that to understand how important movement is. And once you get that, then the rest is sort of easy. And I'm just going to, and it's so wonderful. I really hope I can have a copy of your presentation, Doctor, because it's just wonderful. But I'm just going to talk about, and I am not a medic at all, but I was speaking to a lovely lady here who said she hadn't heard about this before, so I think it would be important. There's a chemical in the brain which is called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, and this is only made when you move. And this chemical encourages neurons to develop and to join up and create new networks. So memory and learning come about because of the production of BDNF, which you make when you move. So learning happens best when you move. And I think there's a wonderful lady called Dr. Elizabeth Kilby who did an amazing video on brain development, and I'm sure you must probably know it, and if you don't, I would like to share it with you, Doctor. And I shared this quite often when I do these sort of talks. And as soon as the parents or practitioners see why movement is so important, they then get it and move on to, being in the outdoors. Thank you for nodding, the lady at the back.
So I think I'd love to speak maybe from the voice of some of the providers and programs that we work with, and the reasons that compel them to want to enhance and modify and naturalize their outdoor spaces to promote, of course, healthy child development, but their reasons for that, be they down the street here in downtown Denver, serving very urban children, to programs that we work with that are nestled very deep in the mountains. And what's so surprising, and I'm looking at my colleague here who helps review all of our applications, and we hear all of the stories, is that their reasons are very similar. And it's that it appears that nature is right outside our door, and we're perhaps surrounded by beauty and mountains and by other people getting out there, and the majority of the children that they're serving are not. And so that is what is so, I would say, shockingly common about the people that we're working with and helping them to re-envision these spaces, is just to pull some of that so that children can access it daily. And so we work through very low-cost strategies with them. Movement is the number one goal, right? If we can get them to move, but where are they moving to, and what are those little discoveries and places along the way that really serve to help them develop into healthy adults.
Yeah, great.
So kind of building on that, one of the things that we talked a lot about when we were going through this process was that nature is a spectrum. So it is the blade of grass outside your front lawn all the way to the great mountain experience you can have here. And the idea that we really tried to incorporate into our approach as a city government was to meet people where they're at. So it's not to say that we need to get every kid out on a canoe and enjoying the waterways in Madison, because some people just don't feel comfortable with that, and that's not going to be an impactful approach. So we really took the approach of just meeting people where they're at. And one of the stories we had of a gentleman was, he's like, well, I grew up in Chicago, and I played with the rats in my back alley. And we're like, that's great. That's where we're going to start. Like, we're not going to get more rats in the alley, but we're going to start with that alley. Like, how do we make that be more, more of a natural? How do you get that, even if it's a small dose of nature? How do you bring that into these environments that don't have them, and that folks don't have the means or the ability to access those?
So when I first started my career, I started teaching seventh grade science. And what really surprised me was that we did not have recess at all, or any physical activity, PE, nothing. And it was, I saw in my classroom as, the hour and a half dragged on, and my kids were exhausted, that it just wasn't appropriate for learning. And so, Dr. Munakata, I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to BDNF and why getting outside or just having some break from formal learning is so important for kids, from 0 all the way up to even middle and high school.
That's such a big trend. I mean, it's such a big change, and I'm seeing that with my kids in middle school also, that's incredibly difficult. And just to tag on to the very last thing you said about how important it is to have this movement, we know that it's true not just for young kids, not just for the middle schoolers, but on and on and on. I mean, when we teach our college courses, one of my students taught a cognitive psychology class where she incorporated everything we know about how people think into how she taught, very strategically. You would think that happens all the time, but professors don't necessarily do that, but she did. And every 20 minutes, she would take a little brain break to say, a minute to just breathe, to just shut your eyes, to do whatever, or a minute to do some fun activity. We know that the brain cannot stay that focused for that long, and it changes across development, and we get a longer and longer span, but even we need that as well, so it's absolutely crucial.
That makes me think of, in Scandinavian countries, they have a Children's Bill of Rights, which states for every hour of learning, children have to have 30 minutes of play. And that it seems so in line with what we know about the brain and development. And curious that we don't incorporate more of that into our formal learning environments. I'm wondering, Sarah, Mary, and Dr. Munakata, as you've worked with formal educators, how have educators latched on, and what has been their receptivity to naturalizing their play spaces or learning environments and infusing more play into their daily routines and practices? And we know our teaching force is overwhelmed and overburdened as is. How can educators think about this in more of an actionable way that is in line with more of their daily practices and routines that they do anyway?
Yeah, this is something that we worry about a lot in the UK, as well as I know you do in the US. And one of the things is there's been a big drive towards forest schools and outdoor learning in general. And really, again, it's kind of like this drip effect of going outside maybe even for 5 or 10 minutes, then, building that up to more time in general. And we really worry about the amount of time that is spent outside. And there's it's interesting, the trends that seem to be the same in the UK and the US and South Africa, where I come from originally. We as kind of early years or early childhood, as you call it here, educators, understand how important it is for people to be outside, but there's such pressure on the educators to try and get that curriculum filled that very often, going outside and actually playing is just something that's forgotten about. And it's so exciting that, the American Association of Pediatrics has literally just come out saying that children have been so scheduled for so long, and now actually to stop all this nonsense of, and it was lovely, I love the way you said, going to extra maths classes. The child is only 2.5. Pilates, Mandarin, etc., etc., etc. And doctors are now being instructed to actually prescribe free play. I mean, absolutely. And kind of what seems so obvious to us isn't really being practiced. So I think the thing is that we all need to sort of act by example, and it's the softly drip effect. And certainly with something like the forest schools, it's lovely because the parents come and accompany the children. And I did a case study and visited 3 forest schools and have written it up, which I don't think we brought any copies, but we can maybe make sure people get them. And I mean, my own thoughts were the morning that I was going to forest school was, oh my God, I'm going to be there for 3 hours, and it was pouring with rain, and this is, what's it going to be like? And I can honestly tell you, it was one of the most magical experiences of my life. And when I was playing, pirates on a log with 2 children, and we were told that it was time now for us to start packing up, and 2.5 hours had flown by, And I was transported back to my childhood, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. And the parents and the staff were all so enthused. So really, it's a case of kind of getting back to basics.
I love that. Getting back to basics, I think, is the name of the game and the reason that a lot of us are here, right? So I can speak from a slightly different perspective, but I will say that a lot of times at workshops where we host educators, we'll start off by showing a video of children in a forest school in Switzerland. And the children are using knives and starting fires, and they're 30 feet up in trees, crossing very fast, swift rivers alone. And there's a teacher, she's letting the kids do what we know they should be doing. But what's so interesting is that the educators aren't really shocked by it, right? Because they know what children are capable of. So there's a few in the house, oh my God, they have a knife. But they understand that children are capable of far more than we let them do and venture towards. And so I would say that just as far as the motivation and the understanding, particularly here in Colorado, I came here from North Carolina where I did very similar work, and very progressive in terms of preschool outdoor environments, even to where they've taken the word playground out of the regulations and put in outdoor learning environment instead, to say that this space is a place for learning. Kids are learning through play in this outdoor space. But here, it's like so far beyond that. People get it, right? It's beyond the why. We know that this is better for kids. How do I do it? And so that's really what our role focuses on, is that technical assistance beyond how do we change this space and how do we help educators use it with children to facilitate what we know children are capable of and what they need.
And I would just go back to the tension that you flagged in your initial question. That's very real. We've seen that in working with educators in the Boulder Valley School District, where we've surveyed them about how they view the importance of social emotional learning in their students. And they put that very, very high up. But when we ask about different ways they could envision incorporating that into their curriculum, they want to, but they flag as the main concern, there's just not enough time. They just can't do it. And so I think this back to the basics message is really crucial. And in the pediatrics report that you were referring to, I saw that they really tried to emphasize that this doesn't have to be an either or, and that the scientists Kathy Hirsch-Pasek and Roberta Golenkoff have really emphasized this idea that it's not that you're either teaching kids or you're letting them play or develop social emotional skills. Those things we know are very related to one another, so they don't have to be pitted against each other in the way that they sometimes are.
Sarah, for those of us here not fully familiar with the ECHO initiative, could you speak to a little bit more about how you provide technical assistance to childcare providers and what that looks like for their teaching practices and their physical environments?
Sure. So I should mention, too, that the work that we do here with ECHO is based off of over a decade of work conducted at NC State University, which was a research unit of the College of Design. So through that work and through really minor enhancements, very modest, very low cost, coupled with educator training, we were able to show that young children, preschool-age children, were more physically active in these renovated spaces. So they're moving more, there's more to do, they're spending more time outside, which is a really big deal. You think about that in all seasons of the year over several years of their life. They're outside much longer. And that's because the educators know, right? These spaces are more engaging, dynamic. It's just like my classroom. We're going to spend as much time outside as we can. And also, we were able to show less conflict between children, less custodial behavior with teachers, and just greater social interactions in general. So children were playing more in groups than alone. So very interesting findings from that. So we took all of that as a National Wildlife Federation still partnered with the Natural Learning Initiative, and we really think about the environment as something that can be designed to entice children to move, but also when they're out there experiencing all of that, we know that that first nature experience is building that future environmental steward. And so that's really where we see our role in this is bringing nature to children every day so that it's along that spectrum of all of the places that they might encounter insects, bugs, butterflies, flowers, just daydreaming and watching the clouds. So we help take educators' ideas of what they want those outdoor classrooms, those spaces to be, and our team of landscape architects designs those spaces. We work with them to help talk about it to their parents. We also work with our partner Qualistar Colorado to provide professional development for the teachers so that as the space is changing, the teachers are learning about new ways that they can engage children in that renovated space. So it's also something I want to point out that is not an overnight change. This is slow and steady. And it's like capacity building and fundraising in these very tiny incremental steps, but it always starts with one project, another project, and this could take place over 3 to 5 years. So we in no way fancy ourselves as like extreme playground makeover crew. We come in and build off of people's ideas and help them to bring their visions to life. But it's all their work. We're just really the providers of the how.
Thanks. So just like Sarah is building capacity and designing spaces, and just like the National Wildlife Federation and NC State are doing this in specific spaces, Justin is really an integral part of this work at a city and county level. Justin, could you speak more to how you approached the Connecting Children in Nature initiative? And like you said earlier, just like Colorado, Madison has a lot of green space. And so could you just talk us through the process of getting different governmental agencies on board with this initiative and how that initiative has played out and created some behavior change and systems change across your 2 counties?
Sure. So as a public health department, which I'm a part of, we look at connection of nature as having many protective factors for health outcomes that come down the road. So we've heard it all here today, the physical benefits, the mental benefits, the ability to have social interactions with folks of different walks of life, and then of course the environmental services that nature provides, water quality, air quality, food systems, et cetera. So for us it was a way to work upstream, which public health's approach is how do we prevent things from becoming chronic diseases. So it was pretty easy sell on our part, and we had leadership buy-in from our director, and then the individual that I worked under, division director, was a very strong proponent of this and pushed very hard, and she reached out to our parks department, and they also were very interested in looking at parks beyond the playground and beyond kind of those natural services, because people are obviously thinking like we need wildlife and then we need playgrounds, and the wildlife needs to be protected and the playground needs to be where the kids are, and the superintendent of the parks is like, well, we want the kids to go trample through the wildlife. We need to preserve some of it, but we also need them to be able to interact with it in a way that's meaningful. So he was a big proponent of it as well. So it was a very natural combination of these 2 government entities to kind of spearhead this initiative going forward. And in Madison, we don't have a lack of nonprofits that are working on getting kids outside. We don't have a lack of environmental educators who are very passionate about this issue. So it was also very easy to get all these folks together in a room to start brainstorming, not necessarily what can we do as an individual agencies, but what can we as the government do to support people's work going forward. One of the key, or the primary approach that we took had to do with early child care centers. And in Madison, we have an accreditation process that accreditates the child care centers in the city of Madison. So we partnered with them and identified 7 early child care centers that were serving predominantly low-income individuals. And we did a series of design sessions with them to try to increase the nature within their outdoor learning environments. And then we utilized some tools from the Nature Learning Initiative, Natural Learning Initiative, So we utilized some of their evaluation tools to get a sense off the bat of kind of what did their space currently look like, and then we involved both the site directors in interviews, the educators in interviews. We observed children playing on those spaces, and then we're able to take that information and work with the designer to come in and help the site directors and the educators do a design session with how they could reimagine their outdoor space. And we were able to provide some funding for that through our partnership with the National League of Cities and the Children of Nature Network. So we, throughout these 7 different sites, it kind of took different, different approaches based upon what they saw. But we were also able to utilize our youth interns to go and co-build these installations with the kids, with the community. So they could be water play features, they could be the installation of a rain barrel, it could be extending a path to reduce conflict that they were seeing as a conflict point for kids. So it was really incorporating the voices of the kids, of the educators, and of the site directors. So we were very excited about that, and we will be following up with some evaluation in the fall. I was hoping to get some of those done before we got here today, but I wasn't able to do that. So we were and so that was one of our focuses, and another one was being in urban regional planning. How do we get this into the kind of decision-making documents, or how do we institutionalize this within the city of Madison? So we worked with the various planning agencies. We were able to incorporate nature-based play concepts into the Parks and Open Space Plan. We were able to include language about the importance of nature beyond the environmental services into our updated comprehensive plan. So they're talking about the mental health benefits of nature. They're talking about nature access points. They're talking about bringing nature inside of the city. So we're very excited about that. These are kind of those small, maybe like trickle type of things that we were mentioned before, but this is the beginning of, these are now embedded in documents that will guide land use for the next 20 years in the city of Madison. And they may be small concepts, but they were concepts that were not there before. So I think that's how we start getting a little bit of that kind of systemic change within the city government.
Great, thanks. So before we open questions up to you all, I want to just broaden the conversation. And in all of the spaces and different ways in which you do this work, what are the biggest challenges that you experience to this work and in your perspectives?
I would say fear. We in the UK are just inundated with health and safety and just trying to keep onto all the regulations. And I think this has really just dampened people's perception of actually how exciting it is, and almost forgetting about risk-benefit assessment and thinking only of risk assessment. So really and truly, that's where it comes from. And I mean, we have ratios. You can't take children out, on it must be a 1-to-2 basis. And I was one day, I do a lot of work in, I call them settings. They are, schools or nurseries, wherever. And the staff were just so terrified about, I was helping them, but they were kind of looking at me as I was there, to inspect. And at one stage, a member of staff wanted to go to the toilet, or the loo, as we call it in the UK. And there was like this, Susan, are you on duty here? Because I've just got to slip off. And I was saying, yeah, it is important, the ratios, but heavens alive, nothing drastic's going to happen. So I think that's really one of the big things is really this fear of children's safety.
I can certainly echo that fear, either real or perceived, and how I don't know how we overcome that, but I do know that there is, particular evidence that can be presented to show the benefits versus the actualized risks of things. I would say money. We do ask we do surveys of childcare providers, and we say, what are your biggest barriers to taking kids outside or changing your space? It is either parents not understanding the benefits and being fearful of children getting shoes muddy, or it's too cold, it's too hot, my child has a runny nose, they can't go outside. We hear that all the time, but it's funding. But I think just emphasizing that small changes can have a big impact, and those small changes don't always have to cost a lot of money. So that's one way to overcome that. So there is good news. We can make a difference there. And I would also add that through the work that we're doing, which is not just sort of project-based on the ground, but it's also looking systematically at all of the regulations that guide the way that childcare spaces are developed. So we've done this 1.5 year long review, and part of that involves looking at what different agencies say about, like, can you have a mud pit in your space, and what's allowed. And we also look at actual instances of injury, and they're very few. They're very few, and most of them come when children are playing on play equipment. So we can show that there are benefits, of course, to things that might seem challenging or risky, but if you follow certain precautions and you think about it in a certain way, as far as common sense safety, there's ways around it. And so actually what we find is a lot more is possible than often childcare programs perceive is possible. So it's just going about it in the right way and making sure you do have the right supervision in place. So we get around that too.
I think some of the biggest challenges that we're facing, at least from within the the government again kind of realm, is that we have a lot of competing priorities. So in order to get the attention of a policymaker, the mayor, right now in Madison and all over the country, there's a booming opioid epidemic that's getting a lot of attention, that's getting a lot of resources, rightfully so. We also have increased gun violence in our community, and these are things that are getting people's attention. So when I'm walking into the mayor's office and talking about the importance of increasing access to nature, I agree with you 110%, and then it's on to the next thing. So I think when the challenges are these competing priorities, and some of these policies or regulations that are prohibiting kids from being outside lie within these institutions that are facing significant issues, and it's just trying to elevate, explain the benefits of time in nature. These are protective factors. This is prevention. To try to bring that to their forefront as opposed to just reacting to the latest thing that's engulfing our community.
I would just add as a parent that I feel the competing priorities just within my own family. So I deeply believe in the kinds of, the importance of the kinds of things we're highlighting today, and my science is very consistent with it, but I will find my kids feeling like they're not getting enough free time or enough time outside, and they'll turn to me and say, but Mom, you're science, and they kind of have to throw that back at me for me to realize, right, I mean, I want to prioritize that, but there's competing priorities, and so just personally, I know this is so important, but will feel like time and life and other things can make it hard to spend that time that I want to.
Absolutely. Well, looking to the brighter side of things, where do you see the biggest opportunities and successes in your own work? And if you have any bright spots or stories that you'd like to share of success markers, please do.
Thank you. Well, I told the story last night, and I'll be very brief, but there is a setting not far from where I live, and they had the most wonderful outdoor area, but the head teacher and the staff were so absolutely caught up in health and safety and not, doing anything that would jeopardize the children's safety in any way, that they just had missed the boat, shall we say. And I work with a wonderful colleague in the UK, and so it was a cold February morning, a Saturday morning, and it was snowing, and there we were going to try and promote their outdoor area. So started again with them, trying to understand why the children should be outside. And there was just a light bulb moment from one of the members of staff, and we eventually went outside and looked at, they had incredible resources which were kind of locked away or so that the children wouldn't be able to use them. And the long and short of it was they've become brave. They're even using one of the community play areas just alongside the school. And I was in there a few days ago, and it's just wonderful what they're doing. And I kind of feel it was this one member of staff, along with us, giving them affirmation that actually they could do it. So it's very, having worked in quality improvement, it's very much the small, step as Sarah says. And particularly with the outside, there are a lot of schools and settings that might just have a very small concrete area, and that is all they have for their outdoors. And I'm a great proponent on mud kitchens, and I was so excited when Sarah said that in a lot of her work, she, builds mud pits and mud kitchens and whatnot. And something as simple as getting a builder's tray, I don't know if you know what that is, just a round tray with a lip about that, deep, with soil and water and sticks and stones and whatnot. And I mean, we all know the wonderful capacity that children have in their imaginations, and just giving them this opportunity is really great. So that's kind of where I've seen the most successes, is from starting really small with simply a mud tray through to, fabulous forest schools. But, every setting is individual, and you really just have to, the staff need to be on board and think laterally. And the most important thing is get the children involved too, because they are, the ones who actually direct us. We're purely the facilitators. And if we can tap into their wonderful imaginations, then I think, we'll really be able to push the boundaries when it comes to outdoor learning.
That was beautiful. I love the idea, right, of this concrete pad with the builder's tray and the mud connecting all the way to the experience of the forest school. Because that's right, it's the spectrum of nature. So I have millions of stories of just those little tiny changes, either that I've witnessed in children who are using these spaces that are very modestly changed, to educators that are telling us and relaying stories of their personal successes of either discovering that if you put a pea seed in the ground, it will grow into a plant with peas on it. Never knew. Now this woman is on her way to becoming a master gardener, had never touched soil. I can think of this one program we worked with. It was just, it's so simple, and that's what I want to emphasize. They had an apple tree in their space, and of course, they get little holes in them at the end of the year, and the worms get them, and the birds get them. And so one fell on the ground, and these boys are looking at it like, oh, I wonder, why does it have a hole? And this very skillful teacher who we've worked with for many years, who was not so into it at first, is like, okay, well, let's figure it out. So she goes and she just gets a couple of pairs of little play scissors, and the boys kind of get to work on like cutting apart the apple. And she's just stepped back, right? She's just helped ask the question, here's the tool, or here's maybe a tool, I don't know. And then she just sort of steps back and watches. And those 4-year-old boys, who had just been sort of racing each other around for at least 30 minutes, they cut the apple apart, they smashed it on different things, they didn't find anything in that apple, so they went to another apple. And it was just this spark of the environment provided those children with the opportunity to come together to figure out this problem. And what that ended up turning into was this 3-month project, using the project approach, all about apples that this class dove into, where the children led it. They asked all the questions. They visited an apple farm. They had a farmer that came to the classroom. It was just amazing, and all because they had this apple tree that they had planted in their space. So it's just amazing to see how those experiences can stack and what those small things can do for children.
I think there's a great opportunity. It's kind of the flip side of the issue of the problem that I explained earlier, but the competing priorities. I think if we can look at the outcomes that different governmental agencies are trying to get to, and align that with the approach that nature can help you get there. So thinking of, people want to minimize gun violence in our community because they want to increase safety, they want to increase the ability for people to feel safe in their communities and to get outside. Nature can also help us do that. So I think trying to align that with the different priorities of different agencies is a great opportunity. It's also a big challenge as well. And I will share one of my favorite stories from our experience. There was this young man, and we took him out on a canoe trip and with all these other kids, and he just hated it. It was awful. The bugs were biting him. He'd never been in a canoe before, just complaining the whole time. And within an hour of being done with the canoe, this kid was just raving about how it was the greatest experience of his entire life. So it was just that little bit of just a little push, and then he had a wonderful experience. Maybe he's a great canoeer now, I have no idea, but I hope so.
And I would just say from a scientific perspective, it's been really encouraging to see how much increasing interest and funding is going toward relevant kinds of studies. So I think it was the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, but I should double check, that has just funded this extraordinarily large multi-year, multi-site, I think it's dozens of sites around the country, to study play and to really understand the different components of play and cultural variations and how it is across different kinds of city versus rural settings and what that might mean longer term for kids. So I think that's incredibly encouraging to see those kinds of resources and attention turning to this issue.
Super exciting. Well, thank you so much. And we want to give some time for you to ask some questions. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. So I'm going to hop down and let you ask away. Great.
I'm just wondering, when you were describing your, I think, graduate student who was teaching at the college level and was giving her students 20 minutes off, and it reminds me of, I have a son with a learning difference, and so it reminds me of how they make arrangements for kids who have ADHD or executive functioning deficits, where they're actually, telling them they need to get up every 20 minutes, or they need to walk around or eat something. And so I wonder, has there been, in your research, or is there some kind of connection? We know that, they're saying, I think 1 in every 10 kids probably has got some sort of learning difference or maybe undiagnosed, but this idea of sort of forced structure on children from the time they're little, is it affecting maybe the growth of some of these learning differences? Is there any correlation there, in terms of sort of forcing structure on them when we know that there may be reasons, particularly I think for boys in evolutionary terms, we know that they need to be physical, which is, why I'd walk into a room and my son at 2 was standing on the kitchen table and my girls never did. So, I'm just wondering if there's been research there or connection there in terms of,
Yeah, very interesting question. Thank you. There's been a lot of discussion around how powerful the interaction is between what the child brings and what the nature of the environment is, both in terms of genetic inclinations of the child and a variety of aspects of the environment. So just to give one example, in the ADHD scenario, some people have argued that the reason we have genetic variance toward ADHD in our population is that these have been advantageous in different times in society. So if you want to have a broad scope of attention, as our ancestors might have wanted to survive, that would be incredibly beneficial, and that it's just in certain contexts, like school, where now the main goal is you sit still and you listen for hours and hours and hours, that then it's classified as a disease. But it's not a gene for a disease because it is fine in various contexts. And some authors have even speculated that with the way the world is continuing to change, becoming so fast-paced and so much information coming at you at once and needing to kind of quickly multitask and switch, that those variants might become advantageous again. And so there's a lot of discussion and thinking about that close interplay. It's not just a problem. It completely depends on the nature of the environment that the individual is in.
Hello, my name is Nancy Ray Clark. I am one of the last 222 Apaches of the Carlanes bloodline, and so I want to welcome you to my homelands. And I want to thank you for all of the work that you do here for the children. And for all of the natives or those indigenous in the room, I want to thank you for being one of the few dark brown faces. You're beautiful, and I'm glad to see you here. I want to thank you all for coming here today and doing this work. I'm the Integrative Holistic Health and Wellness Practitioner. I'm recognized by the AAP and the CPA, and also by the 7 Fire Councils of the Lakota. And what I want to tell you is that it's really a relief to come in here and to see so many faces that care not only about children, but about the environment. And I wanted to just add that I want to encourage you to keep fighting, whether it's through those white patriarchal dominant policies that have been put in place, or through your discovery of medicine. And thank you to all of your Japanese ancestors, because I know that they went through a lot in the 1950s here with us in Colorado, so thank you. I just am so thankful that you're doing this work and that you're taking these strides, and I just want to continue to encourage you as my bloodlines are going extinct. There are other children that are coming, and there are other generations here that are going to need that scientific discovery of neuroscience and plasticity, and they're going to need somebody who really cares about them in those licensing facilities. And they're going to really need to hear about England and those 5,000 years of patriarchal oppression that you women have gone through. And I'm glad to hear that women are taking the forefront in your country. But to the white men in the room, I also want to thank you, because it takes bravery to step out of roles that they're expecting you to be in. And the one question I have for everybody in this room is, how are you going to continue to make a difference once my bloodlines are gone?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the warm welcome. I found something out recently that was so fascinating. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is so foundational to a lot of our research in early childhood and psychological research. And one humongous component of Maslow, his foundations to the hierarchy of needs were not his own. He did not come up with that. They were all native attributes and elements of communal living and of society, and they were co-opted by Maslow, and we now know them as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But they do it has 100% native roots. So just want to share that information with you, and to Google it yourselves. I want to be conscious of time. We have about 5 more minutes for questions. Are there any other questions for our panelists? Great.
Probably shouldn't give me one. Hi, everybody. I'm Kaki. My background is Outward Bound, which is an awesome organization. We definitely believe in unstructured play, which, as anyone who's done unstructured play, it actually takes a lot of work to make unstructured play work, right? Healthy environment, well-trained instructors that are okay with the kid going home with some Band-Aids on, skating that line between a Band-Aid and a cast, Nope, lean towards the Band-Aid, stay away from the cast. So are people familiar with the United Nations, the Solution Summit, and the is it 16 goals or 18 goals? So they've taken a lot of really hard things like we've talked about and broken them down into easy ways to target those goals, right? And so I'm asking the panel, is there anything like that in place? So for example, we need to solve the transportation problem. As an instructor, I have a hard time getting to work sometimes, much less the kids trying to get to work. Forget it, right? Or the tribal kids, forget it. Just trying to get food in some of the South Dakota tribes, much less travel to the mountains 10 miles away, right? So you have transportation issues, you have instructor training. I've had some awesome instructors, and I've had situations where I went, okay, I have the kids and they're safe, but I think my co-instructor might get me killed because they absolutely are not trained, like substantially. No, there is absolutely not a standardized format for what it means when a guide shows up or someone shows up to take care of your kid, and people think there is. That's actually scary. Two, what unstructured play means. It means you have a canoe, some toys. Like, what does that mean even? Right? Healthy unstructured play. Rats in an alley. That is awesome. I would be that kid for sure. And so is there anything like that, right? Like, so we have this Childhood Unplugged Summit, but it'd be great for the next step to be, this group works on transportation. We have a group here working on well-trained instructors and what that even means, certification. What does unstructured play even look like? Desert, mountain, ocean, river, snow, regionally, right? So what do y'all think of that? Like, is there anything like that to kind of formalize unstructured play?
That's impossible, but I like where the wheels are turning, right? This is such a big issue, and obviously there's so many of us in the room here that are from dozens of different organizations and disciplines that are working towards this same common goal. And it's healthy kids and it's a healthy planet too. So I appreciate that comment earlier, that it has to be integrated. But I would love to be able to continue the conversation around the discrete areas here, and then see how, like you guys have done so beautifully, is just sort of tapping the people that are already in those spaces and really creating some definitions around what it looks like here in Colorado.
Any other resources that y'all know of? Well, Mary alluded to this earlier, but afterwards, after the event, when we send you a thank you email, we are going to send you a really rich resource list, and that includes some studies. It includes Sarah's TEDx talk. It includes podcasts about getting over fear and how fear can be a good thing in play. It includes articles. It's just a wealth of resources for you to just continue your learning as it relates to you and your work. And then in terms of really rich resources, we're going to transition in a little bit to our networking hour and exhibitor hall, where we have organizations from across Colorado that are working in these spaces and that are providing outdoor experiences for children, or in-school programming or advocacy. And we're so excited that you'll be able to connect with all of the folks who are doing this work in Colorado in your backyard, and ways that we can make this more actionable, and any resources that they have. So before we transition, I'd like to turn the mic over to my colleague, Mary Garvey, for just a minute. Mary Garvey is our Director of Innovation and Inclusion at the Institute for Child Success. She's led a number of Pay for Success initiatives and work. You might be familiar with that impact financial investing style here in Colorado. But part of our work at ICS is really making sure that we are not only listening to the loudest voices in the room, but we are actively seeking out and making space to include voices that are less heard, and whose voices need to be in the conversation. So to transition us to an equity mindset and frame, and then to transition us out to the exhibitor hall, I will turn it over to my colleague, Mary Garvey. Mary.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Greetings from New York City. Happy to be here. And you know, I was saying, I think Jamie mentioned this earlier, but I had a question from a family member before I came out here. They were like, you know, in the aftermath of Hurricane Florence, they were like, are there someone who's not very familiar with Colorado? They were like, you know, were they impacted by the hurricane? Is it going to be okay? And I was like, I said, you know, I'm not sure that they get hurricanes out there. I don't think that's their thing. But then yesterday I got caught in the middle of a torrential rainstorm, and I said, my God. I said, maybe I was wrong about that. So who knows? Okay, times are changing. So I will just quickly close us out. I have found that each day that we're here on this earth really offers an opportunity to learn more about where we place our value and what fostering equity and inclusion truly means in practice. 2 nights ago, I attended a town hall meeting in New York City about plans to build a prison. Instead of a green space or community center in this historically marginalized community, it was proposed that a prison be built within a 3-block radius of 2 existing schools, a high school and an elementary school. Just for a bit of context for you all, this is in New York City's poorest borough, neighborhoods that are notorious for housing landfills, for some of the highest asthma rates in the country for years, for decades, for childhood obesity, for abysmal rates of employment, and for poor educational outcomes. And I was one of those children with just chronic asthma, and it got better when I moved, surprisingly, right? So as you can imagine, tensions were quite high at this town hall meeting. Some folks became really defensive as there was shouting, chants, and lots of blaming ensued about why, this situation happened. There are people who owned homes on the very block where the prison would be built, and they were not informed that this was even happening. Some people found out the day before, and they're homeowners in this area. So after a while, we had different speakers kind of line up and speak about their thoughts on this. There wasn't one who was in favor of the prison, shockingly. So then a little girl was the next speaker. She was about the age of 9, and she stepped up to the microphone to speak, and suddenly you could hear a pin drop. The room immediately quieted. And so in that moment, 2 things really became clear to me. The first thing is that decades of being disregarded, unheard, misrepresented, and having poor access to quality spaces, despite advocating for these things over and over again, had boldly manifested itself in the form of hurt and anger that night. Whether or not that's what everyone in the room saw it as, that's exactly what it was. Secondly, even in the midst of this anger and hurt and chaos, a fractured community inherently understood that children should always remain the focus. Everything and everyone stopped to focus on what mattered most, the well-being of this little girl who stepped up. So as we wrap up Childhood Unplugged this evening, I take these lessons with me, and I'm really heartened by the focus that we have here today on equity and inclusion, specifically on access to outdoor experiences and spaces. When we think about being inclusive, we really need to ask ourselves, whose voices are being heard? Are the children being taken into account? Whose voices are not part of these really critical conversations? Which children might we not be considering? We shouldn't have to say this, but regardless of where people live, of where people work, regardless of their family composition, what their abilities might be, regardless of race or ethnicity, where they were born, people should be heard and considered, included, and valued. We should all be heard, considered, included, and valued. And the well-being of children, the youngest members of our society, should always remain at the forefront. Their life outcomes must always be our priority. If I could have a third takeaway from the town hall meeting that I attended 2 days ago, it would be about the power of agency. Like the little girl who tapped into her own power that night and hushed the room. It's my hope that each of us today here remembers our influence and the potential for impact. So perhaps as we leave this room today and we participate in our adult play, as I'll call it, during our networking and happy hour that follows, I hope that these exhibitor displays will prompt some discussion about how we can each work to best foster access to these equitable access to these outdoor spaces and experiences, so that one day it really becomes the norm and we don't constantly have to have conversations like this about who has access and who doesn't and what we can do to make it happen. And so I believe we'll be having our networking happy hour in, is it Joy Park Plaza downstairs? Okay, did I get that right? Okay. And yeah, so again, thank you all for being here, and I hope that I get to have conversations with many of you as we usher ourselves downstairs. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mary. And I apologize to our panelists. This is what happens when you don't have your notes of exactly what you're supposed to say when. Can we have one more round of applause for our incredible panelists? Thank you.